Friends, today we'll discuss realism, an important theory of international relations. Unlike liberalism, which is a product of modernity, realism, its history can be traced back to even to ancient times, to ancient Greek history and medieval Renaissance period, and not to speak of in modern times. Realism is a theory. Its principal ideas are as follows. First of all, realism, fundamental assumption of realism is very pessimistic. Man is basically selfish, and conflicts in society are inevitable. Therefore, states, which are nothing but agglomerations of human beings in different communities divided across the entire world, states are also by nature self-interested, and they are mainly interested in their own survival and security. Consequently, conflicts become inevitable amongst them. The second assumption is that the interest of national security and defense are the most vital, topmost considerations in respect of every state. Thirdly, a basic skepticism about progress in international relations, because there is no overarching authority, no world government to regulate the relations of nations. Consequently, the sort of progress which can be achieved in domestic politics cannot be achieved in international politics. States, therefore, operate in an environment of international anarchy in international politics. These are the basic ideas of realism. Now, we can divide our discussion on realism in three different segments. Classical realism, then neoclassical realism, and finally contemporary realism, realist theories as advocated in modern times. So far classical realism is concerned, we will mention at least the names of three important persons. One is Thucydides of ancient Greece, who wrote History of the Great Peloponnesian War, which lasted between 431 BC to 404 BC. So this 5th century BC Greek historian recorded in detail the happenings of his times. His conclusion was that there is a natural inequality among states. Now, in ancient times, Greece itself is a collection of many states, very small states in size, of which some were great powers, like Athens or Sparta or Corinth, and there were many small states. What Thucydides found that small powers, small states, were always at the risk of being dominated by the bigger states, more powerful states like Athens or Sparta. Thucydides' conclusion was that small states should adapt to the conditions of international reality, that they must accept the natural inequality among states. Otherwise, they will simply get destroyed, according to Thucydides. Weaker states, smaller states, must accept the hegemony and domination of the bigger states. That is the reality of the situation. So he concluded that states must accept this condition of natural inequality. This is being realistic, and that is why this theory is known as theory of realism. In Renaissance Italy, the ideas of Niccolò Machiavelli assumed tremendous importance or significance. Machiavelli was concerned about the security and prosperity of the state, and he clearly opined that the ruler of a state, the prince, must combine the qualities of a lion and a fox. The lion represents power, the lust for power and domination, and the fox represents cunning, cleverness that is required for maintaining for the practice of statecraft. A ruler must combine both these qualities. He must be prudent, he must be wise, he must possess all the qualities of proper statesmanship and wisdom, and also the courage and power. Unless the ruler can build a strong state, other states would take advantage of that state. So, in order to do this, achieve this, the state must be built up very strongly, and the ruler must also adopt all sorts of designs which are conventionally considered as wicked. In short, it may be said that Christian piety or Christian ethics and statesmanship do not go hand in hand. One cannot mix up private morality with public morality. The interest of the state is on a higher pedestal. The interest of state cannot be, and actions of the state cannot be examined, cannot be evaluated in terms of private morality or moral ideas of conduct of human beings. So these were the ideas of Niccolò Machiavelli. The third important exponent of classical realism is Thomas Hobbes, an English philosopher of the 17th century. Thomas Hobbes assumed that there was a pre-civil, pre-political condition of human society where there was no security. It was a situation in which every man was at war with all the other people that he met with. It was war of all against all. To escape from this impossible pre-civil, pre-political condition, human beings concluded a contract among themselves by which they accepted a person as the ruler, as the sovereign, and they were bound by a social contract to accept the commands of this particular individual, who became the sovereign, who became the ruler, who was expected to succeed in providing security and well-being to the people. As a result of this, human beings continued to live in society, in states, peacefully. But this contract gave rise to another problem, another security dilemma. That is, states are not bound by any such terms of any social contract. Therefore, conflicts between states are also inevitable. Hobbes thought that the conflicts between states can be regulated by international treaties and agreements. Hobbes adopted a very formal, legalistic approach to social and political questions. So he thought that if we can agree to coexist by arriving at certain treaties and agreements on international plane, we can moderate the scope of conflict among nations. Now, in more modern times, in the 20th century, this great tradition of realism, as expounded by Thucydides, Machiavelli, and Hobbes, we get a summary version of this realist thought in the person of Hans Morgenthau. Morgenthau gave a very cogent, succinct definition of realism. Morgenthau's theory is known as neoclassical because he sought to combine the theories of the traditions of these classical thinkers and how it could be applied in modern times. Morgenthau was living in the 20th century. According to Morgenthau, there is always conflict, possibility of conflict among nations. In fact, his book is called Politics Among Nations, and its subtitle is Struggle for Power. Struggle for power is the essence of international politics, because there is a human lust for power, for domination, for hegemony, and states must accept this reality. And he also accepted and upheld that one must not confuse between private morality and public morality. A statesman has a heavy responsibility about offering protection to its own citizens. And that is the quality of statesmanship, that he must not be swayed by only moral ideas. So ideology for Morgenthau occupies a secondary place of importance. Security of the state, national interest of the state, these are vital. It is a height of irresponsibility on the part of a statesman to be guided purely by ideological considerations. Classical theorists and the neoclassical theorists like Morgenthau are guided by certain normative ideas or normative principles. The guiding norm is the security and survival of the state. It is from the point of view of security of the state that all the policies of the state must be framed. Now, after Morgenthau, we find in modern times exposition of realist ideas by certain thinkers, which we can discuss under the title of contemporary realism. Because they are very current, we would have to discuss the ideas of three persons. One is Thomas Schelling, who wrote an article in 1960. Another is Kenneth Walls, who wrote his theory of neorealism in 1979. Another is an exponent of offensive realism known as John Mearsheimer, who first expounded his ideas in 1993. Now, all these contemporary thinkers, Thomas Schelling, Kenneth Walls, as well as Mearsheimer, all these thinkers, they thought scientific viewpoint, though actually none of them was completely free from entanglement with values of states and their security. Now, what they wanted to propagate, Thomas Schelling, for instance, Thomas Schelling, who wrote a piece known as Strategy of Conflict in 1960. In this piece, Thomas Schelling took it for granted that states exist, and he didn't indulge in normative analysis purely from an empirical viewpoint. He focused on foreign policy and decision making. Now, how we make decisions in the context of modern society, especially in this nuclear age, according to Schilling, the most important consideration is how we strategize our foreign policy positions, our diplomacy. Diplomacy is no longer guided by the traditional idea of military victory. Military victory in modern nuclear age is not what it used to be in case of conventional warfare. Military victory, its basic strategy would be employment of or use of threats. Threats can have enormous value in the nuclear age. Now, threats to be effective must not be accompanied by any compulsion. If we just compel other nations to fall in line, then there might be recriminations and retaliations, and who knows where it will end. What is needed is coercion should be applied in a way so that the opponents ultimately come to find a common bargaining point. Finding a bargaining point is an important part of strategy, according to Schilling, which is very important in modern age. Now, what Schilling therefore recommends that in the modern times, military strategy has become diplomacy of violence, not use of actual violence, but the threat of use of violence, war, possibility of war, and brinkmanship. That is pushing to the brink, to the edge, the opponent to arrive at certain decisions. It is all a question of not actually using force, but actually using different types of threats. The second instance of contemporary realism is that of Kenneth Walls. Kenneth Walls also offered a normative analysis, empirical analysis, and according to Kenneth Walls, the structure of international society determines the actions of the states. The structure is one of decentralized anarchy. There is anarchy in the international sphere. Now, states always perform certain common functions. States impose taxes, states build up defense forces, states develop their own states industrially, making them economically prosperous. But the differences occur in their capabilities. When the capabilities of great powers differ very much, then there is a crisis. Then a crisis occurs. It is most clear when there is a great war between great powers. As a result of the war between great powers, we see that power shifts, balance of power shifts from one end to another end, almost on every occasion. So maintenance of balance of power by maintaining structural stability is the most important consideration. Now, this can be achieved best if we can have a bipolar world, particularly in the nuclear age. Nuclear bipolarity, as it existed in the Cold War between USA and USSR, was a period which ensured a stable peace no major war occurred between 1945 and 1991 because of this nuclear bipolarity that was very quickly achieved by the former Soviet Union and the United States of America. So the Cold War was a period of long peace, according to Kenneth Walls. And we would prefer, at least Kenneth Walls preferred, to have a nuclear bipolar world, which of course is no more there. Now, the third exponent of realism, or what can be called neorealism, is John Mearsheimer. He took the cue from Kenneth Walls that neorealism has still validity and relevance in modern age, even in the post-Cold War age, because Mearsheimer was advocating his position in 1993, by the time when Cold War had actually ended. According to Mearsheimer, the end of the Cold War would inevitably take us back to bad old days of European anarchy and diplomacy. There would be instability in international politics. And Mearsheimer's predictions came true very soon. By 1995, Yugoslavia disintegrated there was a period of a long stretch of 2 years or more than that even, civil conflicts, wars between different groups. Ultimately, Yugoslavia split into several states like Bosnia, Serbia, Croatia, and Kosovo, and even in former Soviet Union, in Azerbaijan, in Armenia, and in Russia, within Russia itself, in Chechnya. Therefore, Mearsheimer's predictions seem to have come true. But it is not completely true, because we have seen that at the same time there was a process of economic integration among states in Western Europe, England, Germany, France, and many other states. Now, this theory has been criticized. First of all, there is a school of thought which is known as English school or international society approach. The English school regards realism as an one-dimensional theory. It is purely state-centric. It is purely concerned with the safety and security and prosperity of state units without taking a holistic picture. Secondly, Martin White, a British thinker, is of the opinion that in international politics there must be a dialogue between three forces of realism, rationalism, and revolutionism. Now, realism stands for what we have all seen, safety, security, and prosperity of the state, national interest. It focuses on national security of the state. Rationalism is what Grotius stood for, international regulation, rational way of lawmaking. And thirdly, revolutionism means we must think of the world as a single community. The idea of Kant, so act as to treat humanity always as an end in itself. So this is a very cosmopolitan view. Now, we will have to have a holistic understanding of the dialectical relations between realism, rationalism, and revolutionism. Otherwise, we would be missing the real scene. Finally, today we have an emancipatory theory proclaimed by Ken Boothe and Andrew Linklater and many others. Now, their idea is completely different. They want a reconceptualization of realism because realism is a standard status quo conservative theory of maintaining the intellectual hegemony of certain great powers. But what we need today, security is no longer individual and state-centric. Security now today has two dimensions. One is individual, that is violation of human rights. Citizens suffering from violation of basic political and human rights in a failed state. As we know that some millions of citizens are fleeing across Aegean Sea to take shelter in Europe. Or, secondly, security has acquired a cosmopolitan nature. It affects everybody across the borders, regardless of borders. Like when we are confronted with environmental threats or ecological problems, or the problem or the danger of nuclear annihilation, nuclear threat, if there is any. So if we reconceptualize and we think in terms of universal solidarist lines, then perhaps we can have a better international order. So by way of conclusion, we may say that the target of emancipatory theory is the Westphalian system of territorial states. But it is still too premature to envision the end of the modern Westphalian state system. As we see that when even there are failed states, when states are collapsing, people are citizens of the states, failing states, are fleeing across borders, or they are establishing, creating, by splitting up the former bigger state into smaller states, as it happened in Yugoslavia. So even today, state is the guarantor of security of the citizens. Security still revolves. And finally, the role of the great powers in maintaining international order has still not become outdated. Still, there is a need of the role to be played by great important powers in international politics.